I want to give you a little background about myself, first of all. I grew up, years better. I grew up in Strasburg, North Dakota, but I was fortunate because I grew up speaking German and English languages. So then I went on to do some German studies and so forth, and then went to Valley City State in the University of North Dakota, Grand Forks. But I was so fortunate to grow up with both languages, and that's been very helpful with my work. But when I was in I think it was the 4th grade, Sister Stefan, she was a school sister of Notre Dame, and she was from Germany, and she said, you should learn, she said, these people around here, they call them Germans from Russia. And at that time, German was still pretty prominent languages. I was born in 1943. And she said, you really need to work on it. And that I've never forgotten that, about why to do all this work on the Germans from Russia.
Yeah.
And then it helped because growing up in Strasburg, 2 of the sisters of Lawrence Welk lived across the street from my school, which was very interesting. And, in America, which you would say North America, that the most famous German-Russian probably would be Bandit or Lawrence Welk. But what would happen is, I remember as growing up into high school, Lawrence would write letters to his sisters, Annamere and Agatha, and they'd get these fancy letters, but they put their language, they never really learned much English, and they couldn't read much English. So what would happen is, they'd bring these letters over to my mother, and I would go over there and I would tell them in German what they said, because my mom wasn't that good about knowing this English either. So we'd go over there, and that's how I got to know him. And I wish we had in our archives all those letters that Lawrence would send me. And they would call, at that time, long distance was expensive, so they would never call on. That was too costly, that cost too much, calling that people. They were very thrifty. But when Lawrence would come home once a year, usually in the fall, after some of his touring, one of the reasons he loved to golf, that was his favorite, but he loved those German noodles. And so they'd have this fresh watermelon German noodles. And then he loved Nitra soup. And Lawrence also loved, pigs in the blanket. He loved those. Those different German dishes, that was his favorite. So that's one of the reasons they came out. But tonight I want to present before I do the PowerPoint, present one of the 10 documentaries. This will be good to show in your program. It's on YouTube too, but it's called A Soulful Sound, Music of the Germans from Russia. What it does, it tells the story of the Germans from Russia music, both secular and religious. And so for this, we commissioned the Jamestown College Choir and the University of Mary Choir in Bismarck. So they got grants from the North Dakota Humanities Council. So they practiced so all the students could sing in the German language without having text. It was beautifully done. How many of you have seen this? Anyone?
Yeah.
Beautifully done. And that's one of the 10 that we've done. And then also, on the table I had this book that I didn't expect to be so popular. So I've been over there a couple of times and people are asking. It's called A Short History of the 5 Colonies, founded between 1891 to 1902, east of Regina, Saskatchewan. It was done by Sebastian Michael Dick in 1999. And I met him once at the German-Russian Convention. And I think it was after we were up there filming. And then I told him, I said, we had just visited the St. Peter's Colony. And I said, I would like more information. He said, well, I did this book. He lived in Saskatoon. And he did this wonderful book on this. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this, but I'm going to get a copy here. So we got permission from him to reprint it. It's available on our website, but now you'll have a copy for your chapter. Because some people asked, but if you're interested, it's on our website. And my business card is over there if you want to write, and I can give you the link to it. But this is a one. There are other items too, but this I wanted to point out because this. And then also, I was so pleased when I saw all these maps when I came here that the chapter has these maps that we produced. One on the Black Sea villages in Besrabia, one on the Crimean area, and then we did one on the Volga villages. But you have all three in your chapter library. You have all of these. But so I brought those for you to see. And then another book. It's really a classic, but I can't leave this here because we're limited with copies. And that's the name of the book. Is called In the Valley of the Kuchergan by Ida Sanger-Bowman. Ida is about 92 or 93. She lives in British Columbia, but she grew up near Tramping Lake. But she wrote this wonderful first account. She was one of those who had vision. When she was a child, and when she was growing up, she asked a lot of questions of her parents. And they immigrated from the village of Strasbourg in the Kuchergan district. How many of you here have roots to the Kuchergan district? The Kuchergan districts are the village of Strasbourg, Baden, Kantel, Elsass, Mannheim, and Strasbourg. I think there's some here with Kuchergan here. I think this one. We'll leave it home. But she came from the Kuchergan area. And then, how many of you here are from the Barisan district, Barisan villages? I think quite a few, because if you have roots to St. Peter's Colony, those are all from the Barisan district. And I think that there's a mixture here of different people. And so I think we also have some Volga German. Who's here that's got Volga German heritage? Of the Volga? Quite a few. I attended the convention in Oklahoma City in August. It was wonderful. So as the GRC, we partner a lot with both societies and work closer with them in various projects. And as I do the PowerPoint, I'll tell you about a couple of projects we're working on, one that relates to the Volga. So I think we'll start now and with the presentation. Okay, these are the staff. I'm going to follow on my screen here. It's a lot easier than talking up close. But anyway, Jeremy Kopp, he's been working at the GRC since 2011. He's the interim director of the German Commercial Heritage Collection. We are based at North Dakota State University. We are privately funded. Our funding for the collection of the location, the building, and everything within the library is all from the university, but we're privately funded, and this has a lot of advantages. So we have some large endowments for that. So there you see Jeremy's the interim director, and then Wyatt is the new archivist. So he works half-time with the NDSU archives and half-time with the GRC, but he's very talented in photography and also doing exhibits. So and in the PowerPoint, you'll see an amazing traveling exhibit that we've done. And then our student assistant is Maya. She does all the ordering and all of the other kinds of work, especially with all this renovation that we're doing. And then Sawyer, we're fortunate that we have a graduate assistant who majors in history with a master's degree. So we fund him with a graduate assistantship. And he, before he came to us, he worked for the U.S. Forest Service. And then he also worked for the United States Park Service. So he's very interested in three-dimensional kinds of exhibit work. Yeah. And then myself. I started at NDSU in 1967 until 2022. And I also work as a producer still at Prairie Public Radio. The German Commercial Heritage Collection was founded in 1978, which is interesting. That's the year when Dr. Karl Stumpf came to to the German-Russian Convention in Fargo. Now, I'll never forget this, because he's been to the United States. That was the third time he came to visit the conventions. But he was there in 1978. And then while he was there, we flew with a private plane to Rugby, North Dakota, which is in north central North Dakota, to dedicate the Stumpf Museum, was in Rugby. And at that time, he gave us some very valuable historical documents that we have in our archives. Yeah. And then it shows the privately funded. And the mission is to share and preserve the history and culture of the Germans from Russia in North Dakota and the Northern Plains, which would include especially Saskatchewan and Alberta. And then here we have, who are the Germans from Russia? This is a photograph from the Father William Sherman photograph collection, which I'll talk about later. Germany in the 18th century. And there you see, I'm not going to read you all the text, but you see the what happened before the people immigrated. You have to remember that the Volga Germans left Germany in 1763 by the invitation of Catherine the Great, and they went to the Volga region. And so they left earlier. And it was a mixture of Catholics and but there were a large number of Catholics that went to the Volga. And there you see the different reasons why they left Germany to go to the Volga regions. And here's the Catherine the Great. Catherine the Great, 1763 invitation, and they needed for agricultural production, Volga German region in Russia, create a buffer between Russia and enemies of the newly acquired land, which was Turkey. And later immigrate primarily to Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, and then of course some later came on to Saskatchewan and to Alberta. And then the importance for North Dakota and South Dakota, and for many of us in Saskatchewan, was Catherine the Great's grandson, Alexander I. In 1804, they started coming primarily from the Boston area and the Alsace area. For instance, on my side, on my mother's side, the Baumgartners and the Wolves, they left in 1804 from near north of Strasbourg, France. And I think that's true for many regions, if you have Kutcher heritage. And this is also true for the Bear side. And that was 1804. Promises were made for free land, freedom from conscription, which meant military, local self-government, maintain culture and language in perpetuity. So many people think that for the Black Sea Germans, they were invited by Catherine the Great. They were invited by her grandson. And here's a map. You have one in your collection, but this shows for the Black Sea, the Bessarabian villages. This is developed from Dr. Stumpf's maps, but it's a little easier to use. And there you see the purple, that's Bessarabia. You see the light, the green up there, Cherson, that's where you have the Beresan villages. They were Catholic and Lutheran. And you see in the pink near Odessa, that's like Liebenthal and so forth, those were Catholic and Lutheran villages. And then in the blue, those are the 6 primary villages called the Kutchergan. They were all Catholic. And then north of there, you have what you call the Gleichdal villages.
Yes.
These are pictures taken from the Homeland tours, and the large one that you see to the left, or the interior, that's the Assumption Church at the village of Seltz. It's with the balcony and so forth, it could see 2,000 people. So you can see this, it became what they called the Mother Catholic Church of South Russia at one time. And it's in ruins now, but it's with the Catholic. And this is the church But wasn't there? But this is the village where Lawrence Welk's parents left when they came to North Dakota. And that little picture, that's a root cellar. And these were all taken these were taken at the home of Louisa Riesling.
No.
Riesling. And there you see some examples of the church. The other church there is from the Church of Mannheim, which is near Odessa, one of those preacher gun roads. And that's a good example of a German house built with sod, just like they did in North Dakota. Seeking freedom again, broken promise, Alexander II policy of Russification, and there you see their privileges were taken away. And this is about 1872. And then came the Homestead Act in the United States of 1862, which offered free land of 160 acres, promise of freedom, yes, unalienable rights. And from 1873 to 1914, there were about 100,000 Germans from Russia who immigrated to the United States, largely to North Dakota. But you have to remember that North Dakota became a state in 1889, so some immigrated before that, but it was largely between the first to come to Dakota Territory was in 1873 in southeast South Dakota, but that was Dakota Territory. But the first to come to North Dakota was South Central North Dakota, 1884. But what happened was, then they started moving up to what's Pierce, especially Pierce County, and they were running out of room and not enough land, and that's when they started coming, especially up to Saskatchewan and the Trenton Lake areas. But for I think the people who came southeast of Regina, they came directly from Russia to Germany on a ship, and they came directly to Canada, I think, from Rainy via Winnipeg.
Christoph and George just came in a group of 5 families, all of them under 30 years of age. And Christoph and George decided they really missed the rest of their family, so they brought their father and remaining siblings. My ancestor Jacob was 14, and 10 years later he decided it was time to homestead. There wasn't great land left in McIntosh County. So he and his brother Frederick got on their bicycles, and they bicycled to McLean County north of Bismarck, 100 to 140 miles, to see what land was available. They packed heat, so to speak. They took a pistol with them, camped out under the stars, and when they got there, they found what they thought was suitable land and proceeded to file for their homesteads. And Jacob realized that there was a quarter of land not spoken for next to his quarter. And he was planning to marry the lovely Katharina Bossler. So he came back to Wishick and he suggested that Katharina should homestead the adjacent quarter, which she did. And a short time later, they made their way to the Wilton County Courthouse and married. No one seemed to make an issue of it. However, questions were asked. She proceeded to preempt on her land and get it paid for so that she wouldn't be at risk of losing it. Homestead law dictated that you needed to live on your acreage and prove it out. Jacob and Katharina built their little house right on the quarter section line, and that's where they lived for many years. Can't you just envision, I'm guessing the bed was probably on the section line, and I'm not sure how they did it, but they did it, and what a great way to live the American dream.
Good. You go.
That was Carol Just, and she is interviewed for the first documentary we did called Children of the Steppe, Children of the Prairie.
Christophen.
And this is a map from the German Life magazine, but gives you a good perspective of the Germans and the German-Russian settlement in the United States. So you can see there where the red is, that's where they settled. But this is not just Germans from Russia, but Germany, because New York, it was estimated about 64 million people with German heritage that speak German came to the United States. And I expect if we had a map like this in Canada, you find it heavily into Western Canada, Saskatchewan, Alberta especially.
Yep.
There's a very important book by Lehman. He wrote a book, I should have gone that long. It's a book on the settlement of the Germans in Western Canada. It was, he did it's by Lehman, and then the University of Newfoundland published it with Jesper Press. And it was his, I think it was for his dissertation in Germany. And then it was translated by the University of Newfoundland, one of the professors. But it's a marvelous book on the settlement of the German groups who came to Western Canada, not just Germans from Russia, other people. Because I think that, for instance, Regina, you have this German club. They're not Germans from Russia who founded this club. They were Germans. But that's a wonderful book that you're not afforded. Email me or whatever, but it's by Lehman on the settlement of it's called the German Canadians in Western Canada, the name of the book. And here you see a map of North Dakota. This was done by the State Historical Society of ethnic settlements in North Dakota. And the Germans, the purple is all the Germans from Russia.
Bad con.
So you see there, I grew up in South Central North Dakota, so you see there, they were either Catholic or Lutheran. But for the Bear Saunders, because of the interest with part of southeastern Regina, the Bear-Son people heavily settled in western North Dakota, where you see the purple, where you can see that Dickinson are there, and they came from the Bear-Son belt. They came later, about maybe 1900 on, until about 1910. So they came a bit later. And it could be that some of you may have relatives with some of these people, especially from the Bear-Son district. How many of you, with any of these here, had relatives who came to North Dakota, and you had connection with them? But this is a good map that is designed for that. And I suspect if you did a map like this in Saskatchewan, it would look very much like that. For southern part of Saskatchewan, heavily with Germans from Russia. And this is a good example of a photograph from the Father William Sherman photograph collection. In that collection, there's 13,000 images, and he donated those to the GRC. And 4,000 of those images of the homesteads. It's the best collection of homestead photographs in the world. So there's 13,000 images, 4,000 we have in digital risings that you can see them.
Nice.
And here's another example of the one that's worked. They were all in black and white, and then also he took the line.
Get up.
Oh my gosh, everybody went to church.
But
Everybody wanted to, everybody went to church because where else could you go? Like, even if the priest didn't come, because the priest had to come out from Lytton to our parish. We didn't have a priest there. But people would, when the priest didn't come, people would still come to church. And they would play the rosary and the litany, and they would sing, and it was just like we were church, you know, all the prayers and everything. Everybody would come. Everybody went to church.
Yeah.
Germans from Russia Heritage Collection on the GRAC. Our purpose is to photograph and manuscript collections, family histories, and genealogy resources. We have about 1,000 family histories. We have oral histories, food waste and recipes and clothing and textiles. And that's where we work with the Emily Rest Costume Collection. Then our outreach and engagements. Research and curriculum and support for students at the university and faculty. Advanced scholarships through student internships, and of course our graduate assistantships. And then curated educational exhibits. Attend and present at community and cultural events, and of course at the national conventions, and produce television documentaries, publish books and translations, and the Journey to the Homeland tours. Unfortunately, because of this war situation, we can no longer go back to Ukraine. And in our archival collections, we have genealogy materials, recipes, oral histories, correspondence and letters, photographs, theology and hymnals, textiles and clothing, and historical objects. Family Histories and Research Library. We have over 13,000 books, over 900 family histories, cookbooks. We have the largest collection of cookbooks on the Germans from Russia in the world that we collect. We think that's important. And then the other documents. Now the food waste is so important. And that's probably, from my perspective, what's going to be kept most of for the Germans from Russia community. They love their food. And they love their recipes. And North Dakota is very famous for churches and towns publishing cookbooks. That's the way of income for the church. I don't know if you do that in Saskatchewan, if you remember that, but North Dakota is very popular. So we have these cookbooks, and it's very, very popular. And there you can see some samples of canning, and of course the sausage and noodles. And here we have what Anne has described, the textile and clothing of the Germans for Russia. And we have close to 400 textile pieces, and now we'll be able to add these items that we've been gifted while we're here in Regina. Now the Dakota Memory Oral History Project I talked before, but this is where the project, there's 199 interviews, and there you see the web address. But you can just Google the digital license, but there you see the address, and that's where you'll find Christine and Mona's interviews would be on there. And Wilfred's interviews would be on there. And the nice thing about this project is the NDSU Press, hopefully by 2026, they're going to publish Jessica's dissertation about these interviews into a book with many of the photographs of the people who were interviewed. And there you see there are 199 interviews, and there you see the web address if you want to, if you're interested in seeing that, listen to that. You can put in digital writing, put in Dakota members, you'll find all the interviews, or you can put in certain names of people. The Shoke letter collection is very interesting. The letters and photographs sent to Johannes and Christina Amy Shoke in Turtle Lake, North Dakota, from relatives in Germany, Bessarabia, and Poland, mostly from 1938 from 1936 to 1951. It's fortunate that the Shoke family in Turtle Lake saved all these letters. And what a lot of the letters were asking for help, especially after the war. How can they help? So they sent a lot of packages to them in Germany when they were, you have to remember that for the Bessarabian Germans, they evacuated from Bessarabia or Romania in 1940 to Poland. So they were there from 1940 until 1945, including the Shook family. So when the Russian forces were coming towards Poland, they had evacuated all these people. And they went to Germany. But fortunately, those people that were sent back to Siberia, they were after 1945, like many of the people who were in the Black Sea villages. And this is a great example. And there you see, what happened was this is likely the best collection of letters that exists of writing to relatives in America for help. So the letters were all handwritten, and then one of the aunts in California, she would take the letters, type them out she typed them from the handwritten on an old typewriter in German, and then she would translate all these letters to English. So all the original letters, her typed letters, and the translations are all on the website. It's amazing. But it gives a good amazing dissertation on these letters, on what they were going through, famine, and, starvation, fear, trying to get to West Germany from East Germany, all those kinds of things. And then we published a very important book. I added this slide to this presentation, the German-Russian Handbook. And again, you can Google this. If you're serious about research, the handbook was done in the German language. And then I decided that we need to have this in the English language. So this is a handbook of all the villages in the former Soviet Union that relate to Germans from Russia. So for instance, if you have the village of Speyer or Rastatt, but it goes into, it'll tell you if there's one Rastatt or two Rastatts, because some of these villages have repeated names, but it gives you the background information to them. So we published this in hardcover, and to reprint this, it would be too costly, so then we decided to make a PDF on our website. So now it's available free of public to the free. And now the AHS wanted to get permission so they could put it on their website, so we give them permission. But this is a wonderful example. But if you wanted to just Google German-Russian Handbook, it would come up. What's so nice about it is, since it's PDF, you can search for all the villages. But it's extremely valuable because a lot of you are wondering about what was the name of the village before. That gives the history of the village and what the present name is. But this is and there you see the website for it. But again, you can just search Google and you would find it. And then the Welk Homestead State Historic Site became a state site in July 1st, 2025. And I've been involved with that in the restoration. It's amazing what's developed there. And there you see, it gives you some brief background on the size it is. And Lawrence Welk's parents immigrated from the village of Sells to this homestead. They were homesteaders in 1893. And all of the children that were of the family were all born in that house with midwives. And there you see the site. But the plan is on June 1st of 2025 is the 10th anniversary that the state took over, and so we're going to have quite a big event. And part of that's going to be the unveiling of a statue of Lawrence Welk. I don't know if you remember, some of you may have been to Branson, Missouri, and you know about Branson, all the theaters. Well, they used to have the Lawrence Welk Theater there. It was very famous, and the stars would perform there. Well, there was a statue outside, a life-size bronze statue of Lawrence Welk. And so the family of Lawrence Welk, they sold the properties to Marriott. They didn't know what to do with the statue, and also many frames in the lobby. So that's all been gifted to the Frank Welk Homestead. So we're going to unveil that. We think that's going to be very popular for tourism. They like to take pictures to the cars. It's the second statue of Lawrence like this at the Welk Resort, which is near Escondido.
Okay.
And this is our new arrangement. You can see, because the GRC, everything has been moved and everything, because we're going to do a complete renovation, which includes these amazing exhibits. Because we think that, people are coming in and they're asking, we want to see these exhibits and so forth. So that's a new plan here. It's going to be three-dimensional and so forth. So that's the plan for that. And, but we got to find some money for it first. And that's why they put, so Jeremy said, let's put this slide into it. I said, I don't know, we're going to do that every time. The people don't like it. They get their money's much worth, much less, but we put it on there. Any questions? Did I put you to sleep? Any questions about that? The, relating to my work and some projects I'm working on, one of them is the 11th documentary on the Germans from Russia series is going to be on the Welk Homestead. And that's going to premiere on March 11th, 2025. That's the birthday of Lawrence Welk. He was born in March 11th, 1902. So that'll premiere there, and eventually it'll get on PBS stations. And we expect it to be quite popular because his name is very well known. You have to remember that the Lawrence Welk show is still on many PBS stations. I don't know if you can get up here or not, but I think, as I said earlier, I think in Regina you get the Detroit PBS station.
Yeah.
We wish you would get the Prairie Public station from North Dakota, but that's now the issue. But then also Dr. Lance Ritchie, who's the president of the University of St. Francis in Fort Wayne, Indiana, he was always very interested in Lawrence Welk. And so he has been working. So NDSU Press is going to publish a 3-volume series on a new biography of Lawrence Welk. It's going to be amazing. Probably the best biography ever written of a television entertainer in Lawrence Welk. You have to remember that Lawrence Welk only had a third-grade education. But what's so interesting for me when I went by, and they talked about these Ursuline sisters, but you have to remember that when Bishop Worley, he was the abbot at Assumption Abbey in Richardson, North Dakota. He became the bishop of Bismarck, the Diocese of Bismarck. He needed to find Catholic nuns who could speak the German language, so he invited the Ursuline sisters. So they came, and so the Ursuline sisters were Lawrence Welk's teachers in the grade, and he would with a boarding school for a while. But he got sick, according to what you hear from the family, he had a third-grade education. That's never really been accurately identified, but I think that's all he had for education. And he never spoke English until he left for Farmstead at 21. Any other questions you have? Mary Ann, you must have something.
I've got a question.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm not a German from Russia, but I am interested in the 5 colonies down east of here. And the little video you have of the family that put their house on the section line for the 2 homesteads reminded me of a question I had about the colonies. How did the folks who came and homesteaded and they set up their homes in a colony, how did they get around the Homestead Act? And I believe
You're talking about in Canada?
Yeah, no, in Canada.
In Canada, I can't tell you, I would have to need someone else. I can't tell you too much about the homestead. Yeah, someone else. His question was about the homestead and the location of the dwelling.
If you wish, I can give you a little bit about St. Peter's.
Yes.
The people that moved into the area wanted to live together, and they had one common well that everybody used. And the government, of course, didn't want them to be there. And he said, well, if they didn't do that, they'd have to move. So one of the settlers, Johann Uppergavich, was the spokesman, I believe, for the people, the 21 or 14 families. And he wrote a letter to the Interior of Canada government body and had the signatures of all the people that were there and asked for permission for them to live as a community like they had in the past, so that they could share and be able to survive. And that was the basic for St. Peter's.
Well, he solved the mystery for me, because I always wondered how they got out of that requirement.
Give me
Yeah,
questions?
yes.
I would just like to reiterate what was just said, because I was historical enough. I went into the history of that, and that's true. That signature of all the families at St. Peter's was issued to the Minister of Immigration, and he gave them permission. It took a while, because otherwise they would each have to be in their own quarter section and drill their own wells, and the water out there is not very easy to get. So they were given permission to do that, and they have their own well. Yeah. There's another one in Saskatchewan called St. Bruno's, and they did the same thing up there.
Now, if you're interested and you want to go online, go online to Archives Canada, or you can go down to the archives in Regina, and I have downloaded a copy of the petition and the names and the signatures for that particular event. But it was a water shortage issue that started it all.
In the printings of our history books, we found exceptions were made where, for example, a son is living with his parents, but he takes up a homestead. He has to live on it supposed to live on it for 6 months and has to cultivate 10 acres the first year and seed 3 acres and, these regulations. But some of them took up a homestead not knowing that several times in a decade it would be almost completely flooded. And so they would get an exception that they could live on their parents, with their parents, especially when they were still single, and that they would, would do the cultivating and stuff from the home yard. Quite often they were, relative to each other across the road and stuff like that. But there were many exceptions made that way.
But those were single.
In the United States, they had to live with a land for
No, they were not yet approved.
In the United States, they had to live with a land for 10 years. The biggest problem there was isolation. They were used to living in, they live in a village and then they go out to farm and they couldn't do that anymore. That was a big problem for them because they were trying to build the farm, the homesteads or the farms close to the church on the corners so they'd be close to the other ones.
Great.
Now, one thing I was going to mention too because I was reminded today about the Hutterites. The first Hutterites to come to North America was in 1873. They came to Bonhomie in southeast North Dakota. So that's the oldest colony in North America. So they were there, and then what happened was, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but they did not believe in serving in the military to peasants. So what happened was they all left South Dakota and they came up to, especially Manitoba and Indian Saskatchewan. And then many of them stayed there. That's why they're here in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And then after the war, they were very good farmers and so on. They were invited back to South Dakota. And so since then, there's daughter colonies in North Dakota and many of them. But then you have two different, you have the Laramide and the Dartmouth. And I think the colonies in North Dakota and South Dakota, the minister for all those colonies lives in the Spring Prairie Hutterite colony near Fargo, near Moorhead. But they're very much more conservative than the ones who live in, I would have to say in Saskatchewan, because I know this because I'm getting emails, and also some of them are on their phones and so forth, so they email me with someone to come. They were hoping that these presentations would be, on Zoom or whatever, so they're a little bit more liberal, and they're definitely not the ones like the ones in North Dakota, because they wouldn't be allowed to do that.
No.
And they have website work. That's the village of Maxfield, down south there. Yes.
There's a colony right near Star City. and I worked there with them.
Yes.
And he said, my neighbors hate me because I use artificial insemination instead of using a bull. He said, bulls kill people and artificial insemination does not. Larry's like, yeah.
Yeah, what we do, we get a lot of books that are donated to us in the German language. They were this German towns in North Dakota and South Dakota. So I take them to the how to write counties, like the ones near Fargo, and I take it to Forest River and some of them. But Benjamin Hofer, who lives south of here 2 hours, he wanted to come to this meeting, but he couldn't. But he was hoping I'd bring all these books along for him, and I said, that's not that easy across the border. You get lots of questions. You have lots of stuff in your car, why? So I'm very hesitant to do that. I certainly want to thank all those involved, inviting Ann and myself to come up here, and we hope that this can become a little bit of a partnership between the GRC and the Regina Chapter for the future for other activities. I think there's a lot of potential. And had we not come up here, I want to thank Mona and her husband. They brought to tonight 4 family histories, amazing histories. One of Mr. Lively's older German heritage, his family. And then Mona has these three volumes there. It's amazing. So we're going to take those back home for our archives. And we're going to save them postage. We have to, because to send those books, the cost is $200-300. Thank you so much for those donation of the family histories.
She did all the work, and I get some of the credit.
They both have done a tremendous amount
She
of work.
she was the person who was crazy about this research, and she spent some nights I would go to bed, and I'd wake up in the morning, and she had written 120 letters. That's when you were doing letters yet. And I'd say, you didn't get much sleep last night, did she? She said, well, I actually never got to bed at all. But she was sending out these forms for people to fill in their names and addresses, and then she'd get one back, and the woman would write that, yes, we have 4 children, 3 of them are married, and that's it. Like to who, where, when, how, what's their name, who are they married to? So she spent the last 40, 50 years, 82, we produced the first book in 82. So that's,
They've done a lot of work with it. And I want to certainly recognize Maria Tucher is here because she and Joseph came down to Fargo. We did an interview with Joseph, watching the videotape from World War II, and it's amazing an interview. So we've had a wonderful friendship, and these marvelous donations headed to our collections. So we're working on preservation, and as I said earlier, we work very closely with the Germans from Russia Heritage Society and with the American Historical Society, Germans from Russia. But in July of 2026, the GRHS convention is going to be in Fargo, when we hope to dedicate the new GRC and all these exhibits and this new facilities. Any other questions? If not, I can see that it's time for shut-eye here. Thank you so much for our nice visit to Regina.
Thank you, Michael. It's always a pleasure to have you. And thank you again. So safe traveling home. Michael did touch on Karl Stumpf. Now, Karl Stumpf was I believe he was in the German army in World War II, and he documented all the villages in the Bezlani area, all over southern Ukraine now. And he put all these maps together, the villages and that sort of thing. Very well versed fellow. Anyways, Karl Stumpf actually was in Regina, and he stayed at my wife's parents' place at one point over years and years ago, so she knew about him before I did. But anyways, I went through Karl Stumpf's books, and I located our family back in Germany. So I went back 200 years in our family history through Stumpf's book to Germany. Anyways, our village is not far as west from Karlsruhe, the south part, just north of the French border. It's a little village called Buchelberg, and it's in the Bean-Wald forest. It's the only village in this bee forest, as it's called, okay? Very interesting. So anyways, my history was, well, my great-great-great-grandfather was a woodcutter in a forest. Well, let's go find this place. So anyways, I emailed a Michael Knoll in Buchelberg. He's a businessman, he builds windows, Fensterbauer. Anyways, he got my email, deleted it, okay? So anyways, okay, but anyway, something made him take it back out of the bin and relook at it. So he Google Earthed us, found that we were legitimate people here in Regina, so then we opened up a correspondence. So anyways, very, very interesting. So in 2012, my wife Beryl and I did travel to Buchenberg in Germany. We made contact with him, and again, he had no idea we even existed here in Canada. The family was two brothers in Buchelberg. One went to Russia, and one stayed in Buchelberg, okay? So the one that went to Russia is, of course, our family line, and his family line is there right now. So anyways, we've been back in 2018 again, and we've had really delightful visits. They came over here last year to Canada. They landed in Victoria, and they drove east to Saskatchewan. Everybody lands here and goes west. But anyways, they drove to Saskatchewan, and they had a terrific time here. They just loved the prairies. And he's also a painter by hobby type thing, whatever. And he was just fascinated with the Saskatchewan history and the people here. So we have a very good relationship, open correspondence with them now in Buchelberg. And I find it very fascinating because just up the road, his wife actually works in Kendall. Okay, she bikes to Kendall every day, it's 16 kilometers away. That's where she goes to work. So I said, oh, well, our family settled in Kendall, Saskatchewan in 1807. So I mean, ironic, whatever, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. So anyways, just up the road to Speyer and Montheim and all those sort of things, eh? So it's very, very interesting history. So if you have the chance, pursue it, do the homework, and something may come out of it. Like, again, we've all these talented people at our fingertips, the YouTube videos, everything's there for us if we want to pursue it. And for us, 100%. I am just so thankful that I pursued it through the Stumpf books, and we made contact, and it was really neat. And it doesn't look at all like me. So, so anyways, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out. Please look around at some of the information in the maps and that sort of thing. We do have a group. We meet once a month in September through November, and then back again in February to the spring. And we meet at Trinity Lutheran Church, and they've treated us quite nicely. So anyways, we have a library. The maps are an indication of what we have on file. We have many DVDs from things like the Schmeckfest and a lot of village histories from South Dakota that we gathered over the years. They were on VHS, we've got them on CDs, or DVDs, whatever, so you can play those too, you can borrow them. So we have a lot of information at our fingertips, and we do have some very knowledgeable people in our group. I would like to relate to Jeanette Hipfner over there, Jeanette Tegabal. I think she's related to half the people in Saskatchewan. Anyways, she knows everybody, who their mother was, who their grandmother was, who died first, whatever, I don't know. But anyways, she's a very reliable person. So we have a lot of people at our fingertips, and we don't know, of course, we will push you on to somebody else that might be able to help you. So it's very nice, and again, I thank you for coming out this evening, and thank you, Michael and Anne, again. It's nice having you.